In the middle of a live congressional hearing, at 0:03, Karoline Leavitt muttered under her breath, "Go back to Africa." She didn't realize her microphone was still on. What Jasmine Crockett said in response left the entire room and the nation watching, speechless. The air inside the Kansas state capitol was dry, thick with anticipation. The faint sounds of folded papers, pens clicking, murmurs beneath breaths filled the chamber. It was clear this panel had dragged on too long and grown too personal. Tension clung to the room like dust on jackets. The Congressional Subcommittee, hearing on education policy, had stretched into its third hour. Tempers were rising. Representative Jasmine Crockett sat upright in a sharp blue blazer. She had been mostly silent during the last segment, not because she lacked words, but because she was choosing her moment. She always did. Across from her sat Karoline Leavitt, once a familiar face on morning political shows, now a senior aide on federal education reform, sharp-tongued, ambitious, and never one to back down. But today, Karoline looked agitated, defensive. Being challenged, especially by a black woman with such presence, clearly rubbed her the wrong way. When Jasmine finally spoke, her tone was firm but measured. "So what you're saying," she said, locking eyes with Karoline, "is that schools in underserved districts just aren't trying hard enough?" Karoline crossed her arms, shifted in her seat. "I'm saying standards have to be enforced across the board. No exceptions." But the board was never level. Jasmine's voice stayed, steady as she fired back. "We can't talk fairness without addressing access. Context matters. So does history." Karoline scoffed quietly. Her mic was still on. Then it happened. She leaned slightly to the left, not fully into the mic, but close enough, and muttered, crisp and unmistakable, "She should just go back to Africa." A beat of silence. A cough. Papers shuffled. Somewhere, at the back of the room, a throat tightened. At first, the words didn't register, until a black intern near the media table stiffened, turning slowly toward Karoline. The live feed didn't miss a moment. Some glanced at Jasmine, expecting her to stand, storm out, or say something loud. But she didn't. She folded her hands, calmly, blinked slowly, and waited. The subcommittee chair, an older man from Idaho, cleared his throat. "Let's stay on topic, please." Karoline didn't flinch. She reached for her water bottle, took a sip, as if nothing had happened. But her ears were red. That's when she knew the mic had caught her slip. The clip was already being clipped and captioned inside the chamber. Jasmine looked at her, neither angry nor broken, just steady. That look said, "You think you hurt me, but all you've done is reveal who you really are." Still, Jasmine didn't speak. She turned back to her notepad, made a single note, and let the session continue as if normal. Those 10 seconds spoke louder than any speech ever could. But silence rarely stays silent, especially when a microphone is live and the country is listening. The clip went viral before the hearing ended. Someone in the press box had recorded it on their phone, zooming in on Karoline's face at the moment the words slipped out. Within 20 minutes, "Go back to Africa" was trending nationwide. Hashtags piled up, memes circulated. The video was reposted, captioned, slowed down, analyzed, debated endlessly. Karoline's team knew it was bad the moment they left the chamber. Her aide, Brian, a young man in a charcoal suit, walked quickly beside her. "We have to say it was misheard," he whispered, shielding her from the waiting cameras. "I mumbled," Karoline replied, not breaking stride. "No one knows exactly what I said." But she was wrong. People heard it clearly, too clear, too raw. The sharpness in her voice, the irritation in her pause, the dismissiveness. It was unmistakable. They ducked into a staff hallway. Karoline's phone buzzed non-stop. Texts from allies, party members, some furious, some warning, none defending. A statement had to be crafted immediately. By the time the press team released their first response, it read, "Miss Leavitt was misquoted. Due to background noise and misinterpretation, she stands firmly against all forms of racism and bias." But the public had already made up their minds. They weren't just angry, they were disappointed. Not just because of what was said, but because this wasn't the first time. They were tired of excuses, deflections, and PR spin. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett said nothing. Reporters followed her to the elevator. "Congresswoman, do you want to respond to Miss Leavitt's comment?" one asked. Jasmine glanced at them, pressed the elevator button, and replied simply, "Not yet." That "yet" did something unexpected. Her supporters saw it as graceful restraint. Her critics called it calculated theater. Inside a quiet cafe near the Capitol, 3 staffers for another representative huddled around a laptop, watching the clip again. One, a middle-aged white man with tired eyes, rubbed his temples. "This is gonna go nuclear," he muttered. "If she speaks, it'll be everywhere." "She has to," the younger staffer said. But Jasmine wasn't rushing. That evening, she sat far from cameras in her hotel room, quietly with her mother, who had flown in from Texarkana. They ate dinner in silence for a while, until her mother finally said, "You're going to say something, aren't you?" Jasmine looked out at the city lights, flickering under a cloudy sky. "Yeah," she said, "but it won't be what they're expecting." Elsewhere, Karoline wasn't sleeping. She sat on her hotel bed, laptop open, watching cable news loop the clip again and again. Her phone buzzed with missed calls. Party donors, former colleagues, people were already jumping ship. Some told her to keep quiet. Others urged a formal apology. But Karoline wasn't wired for humility, not yet. "She misheard me," she said aloud, mostly to herself. Brian, seated across the room, didn't respond. He just stared at her, not with judgment, but worry. This moment was bigger than both women. Karoline was beginning to realize she didn't control the narrative anymore. Power shifts when people least expect it. And Jasmine was about to take control in a way no one saw coming. The next morning, the Capitol cafeteria was unusually quiet. Cameras lined the hallway outside the press room, cords snaked across the floor. Reporters sipped burnt coffee, eyes glued to their phones. Something was coming. They could feel it. At exactly 10 a.m., Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stepped to the podium, alone, no entourage, no flags stacked behind her, no speechwriters waiting in the wings, just her, a black folder in hand, and that same calm she carried the day before. The cameras clicked on as she took the mic. She waited, a brief moment, just enough for people to focus. Then she opened the folder, looked at it once, and closed it. "I was going to read something. Prepared," she said. "But I don't think I need to." She leaned into the microphone. "What happened yesterday wasn't new to me." Her voice was steady, measured, not righteous or poetic, just present. "I've been told to go back since I was a teenager, standing in line at a store in Shreveport. Back then, it was an older woman who didn't like how I looked her in the eye. I've heard it on airplanes, whispered in elevators, even in boardrooms, though more politely phrased. So no, I wasn't shocked." She paused. Some reporters shifted in their seats. "What shocked me," she continued, "was that some people thought I should be shocked. Like this was the first time something like this slipped out. Like this was some tragic accident in a world that usually runs on respect. That's not the country I know." The room was silent. No clicks, no interruptions. "I want people to understand something," she said. "When you tell someone to go back, you're not questioning their citizenship. You're questioning their belonging, their value, their place at the table." She looked straight into the camera. "And I'm not going anywhere." There it was, the line that pierced through thousands of screens. Before the press conference even ended, it was hitting classrooms, barbershops, back porches, in towns that had never heard of Jasmine Crockett before, but knew that tone, that resolve. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She told a story. One year, my father took me to Washington, D.C. We stood outside the Supreme Court, and I remember him saying, "This building belongs to you too." I was 11. I didn't believe him. I still have days when I don't. She exhaled. But I came here anyway. I ran for office anyway. I take up space here anyway. Not because I was invited, but because I knew I didn't need permission. Her words weren't polished like a speechwriter's script. They were sharp, raw, and personal. "I'm not here to shame Karoline Leavitt," she said. "I'm here to remind everyone watching, belonging doesn't have to be earned. We belong because we're human. Because we wake up here, fight here, build here, love here. We belong because our ancestors did the work that made this place possible." She paused, letting silence settle before continuing. If that discomfort prompts someone to say what she said, then maybe that discomfort is something they need to face, not me. The press conference ended with no questions taken. She folded her folder, stepped away from the podium, and walked out like she had better things to do than argue, and she did. Her phone rang seconds later. People crying, people cheering, even some from the opposite side of the aisle texting, "You said what I couldn't say out loud." But not everyone applauded. Some were preparing a backlash that would test everything Jasmine stood for. By noon, her words had been clipped and shared across every platform that mattered. Millions watched before lunch, some replaying, not because they missed it, but because they needed to feel it again. Across the country, people responded in ways rarely seen anymore, not in slogans or hashtags, but in stories, in voices. In a small diner outside Toledo, Ohio, an older black man named Reggie, sitting in a booth he'd claimed for 20 years, leaned over his coffee and told the waitress, "I didn't even know her name before this, but now that woman's got steel in her spine." In Flagstaff, Arizona, a Navajo high school teacher paused her lesson, pulled up the video on the classroom projector, and let her students sit in silence. Then she said, "That's how you carry yourself when they try to cut you down." In Fresno, California, a retired white veteran named Bill posted on Facebook for the first time in over a year. Just one sentence. She spoke for more than just herself, but not everyone saw it that way. Conservative radio wasted no time spinning the narrative. One host in Des Moines barked into the mic, "This is another orchestrated attempt to play the victim, to divide us." "She's grandstanding," callers phoned in. Some agreed, some pushed back. She didn't lose her composure. One caller said, "She told the truth. If you don't like how it sounds, maybe you should ask yourself why." Karoline stayed silent. Her team released a longer, polished statement, offering regret if her words were misunderstood, but stopping short of admitting anything. The internet tore it apart. That night, Karoline paced inside a borrowed townhouse in Arlington, Virginia. Windows closed, lights off, watching the clip again. Jasmine's words, the poise, the quiet fire beneath. She muttered under her breath, "She's winning this." Her aide, Brian, nodded from across the kitchen. "You're not going to spin your way out of this one." "I didn't mean it like that," Karoline whispered. "It just slipped." Brian leaned on the counter. "That's the problem." Elsewhere, the impact kept growing. On a college campus in Madison, Wisconsin, students packed an auditorium meant for an unrelated panel. The event morphed into a discussion on identity, belonging, and who gets to feel at home in America. Jasmine's speech played on a loop between speakers. In a barbershop in Mobile, Alabama, older men paused mid-cut to talk about the way she handled herself. One said, "Back in my day, you got loud or you swung. She did neither. That takes more strength than people know." But the weight of the moment hit Jasmine too. She sat alone in her apartment, lights low, a glass of water in hand. She hadn't turned on the news. She didn't want to hear her name said by people who never knew the silence she carried on that panel floor. Her phone buzzed. A message. From a name she hadn't expected. Senator Leah Drummond, a conservative from Texas. The message was brief. That was powerful. Would you meet? Jasmine stared at the screen. Not shocked, but in that moment the world felt heavier than ever. Her words had shaken something loose. People were listening. And now, people who had never sat across from her wanted to talk. But one person still hadn't spoken, and when she did, it would change the entire tone of the conversation. In the middle of a live congressional hearing, Karoline Leavitt muttered under her breath, "Go back to Africa." She didn't know her mic was on. What Jasmine Crockett said in response left the room speechless, and America watching.